Hello, everybody. We're now live, and thank you for joining us. Just waiting for a couple more people to join, and then we will get started with the presentation. Okay, hi everybody, welcome to our webinar. It's a joint webinar between CryptoSense and Unbound Tech. Today we're going to be talking about cloud migration, challenges and mitigations. Our two presenters today are Guy Pierre and Graham Steele. You can read a bit more about both Graham and Guy in these bios when we send you the slide deck at the end of the presentation. They both have a lot of experience in cryptography and in the world of technology. Graham and Guy are going to be co-presenting, so I'm going to hand over now to Graham to get started.
Okay, so thanks a lot for that introduction, Sam. So yeah, as Sam said, Guy and I are going to lead you through this topic today. So Guy is the VP of R&D at Unbound Tech. He'll talk a bit more in a second. I'm the CEO and founder of CryptoSense, so I am also the technical founder, so I lead the scientific and product effort. So today we're going to talk about cloud migration, and here's a little summary of what we're going to go through. We're going to be looking at what are the challenges that people face in enterprises that deal with significant amounts of sensitive data when they want to move these critical workloads to the cloud. And one of these issues is to do with determining what data and processes really are sensitive in that app that we want to migrate. So that we're going to look a little bit about how we can do that, what processes actually help to get that job done. We're going to look at what kind of protection we might want to add to that sensitive data before we actually do the migration. And finally, we're going to look a little more about how to securely migrate to the cloud. So let's talk a little bit more about challenges of cloud migration. So here I'd like to introduce Guy to talk a little bit more about your experience, Guy, of looking at sensitive applications with your customers at Unbound Tech and how you've helped them identify the barriers to migration.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Graham, for the introduction. Indeed, we see we are involved in different processes and prospects that are considering already in process of migrating their applications and workloads to the cloud. And we introduce here or present here the three most common issues or challenges that we see these companies face. So, the big challenge is taking an on-prem running and used application and migrating it to the cloud with as less friction as possible. So we start with the fact that on-prem apps, they actually don't completely use encryption today. There's a sense of a common practice saying that the internal network is more secure than the cloud one. So many encryption schemes are not used, whether it's the usage of encryption in transit using TLS, whether it's the usage of encryption for data on the database or on disk. These methods are not always used when the application is running on-prem, while when we want to consider moving it to the cloud environment, this is a must, and this is something that must change in the existing application. So that's a very significant challenge because encrypting data is not a simple thing. In addition, once you start considering the encryption of data for basically all data which is considered sensitive, you're now facing also with the second challenge of how do you manage the encryption keys. as more data needs to be encrypted, and the encryption covers different types of keys. So you have SSH keys, you have TLS keys, you have keys used for encryption of data elements, keys used for tokenization, and so on and so forth. You are now being challenged with how to manage these keys, how to ensure availability of the keys, how to back up, and so on. All the aspects of doing key management properly. Yeah.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, that's a good layout. And what's very clear from that is that there's a lot of work to do for each application. And I guess your clients, a bit like ours, are facing this problem at scale for a lot of applications.
Yeah, that's for sure. So a single application is something that you can probably figure out some ad hoc solution. When you start considering movement, and these large enterprises, they have tens or even more, hundreds of different applications, then solving this problem in scale is indeed something that you need to productize this process, to find the relevant tools that will allow you to complete this process successfully. Indeed.
Great. And so a little bit about our sort of view on this. So a lot of our clients kind of overlap in these needs. What we've seen is that a lot of the time, if there is existing application level encryption going on, this includes using services which are specific to the data center where the application is currently operating. So there might be local hardware, so local HSMs, which are actually there in the customer's data center, which are not going to be there when they move to the cloud. So if you want to take advantage of cloud scaling and availability and the elasticity, you can't expect to put your own boxes in those cloud data centers. So we need to do this, what we might call cutting the cord, that is to replace those hardware boxes with some kind of encryption that's managed by the cloud. And of course, this process that was going on in the data center is something that our customers had been mastering for a long time. So they spent a long time figuring out the risks and the management procedures around those devices to minimize those risks. And now they're going to have to put their confidence in some cloud-based services. They need to find out how to do that in a way that keeps their security case intact, keeps their risk managed, and keeps their compliance cases up to date. And as we were saying, that the challenge for this is that we could maybe do that with one application in an ad hoc way, but we're going to have to do this at scale. We don't want to rewrite all of those application cases. So we're going to need blueprints to be able to do this for similar applications at some kind of large scale. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to determine which data and processes are actually sensitive in the app that we want to move. So we've figured out that we're going to have to think about encryption and key management for this new app in its cloud-based world. How do we figure out which of the processes and the data that we actually want to apply this new encryption and key management to? So subsets of data will already be protected by encryption, and we want to be able to track that down and figure out what it is and see which keys are being used, what they're going to be used for, find the signing operations, find what's being used for authorization, what certificates are being used, and check the infrastructure to understand the TLS servers and the certificates which are actually in there. Now, Guy, you guys have a nice diagram which gives an impression of what a typical enterprise app might have in terms of these keys. Do you want to talk us a little bit through that?
Yeah, so this diagram basically shows let's say the standard structure. We were just discussing blueprints and similarities between different applications. So this basically gives you a description or kind of a design pattern of how usually applications are using keys for different purposes, basically completing different layers of protection. And this kind of pattern would help you, would assist you to identify how your application is using keys and which keys need to be migrated, protected, identified, and so on. So here we can see some classic usages of keys. One example, the top line, is about database encryption. It's a very standard approach to protect data at rest. You would encrypt your database. So the basic approach would be to use the database encryption keys and use technologies such as TDE to protect your database. If you have implemented tokenization or other options, methods to do application-level encryption, then you need to be able to access these keys from your application code and encrypt data. And there are different other use cases where keys would be used for signing, not just encryption. Here, the classic example, and I guess almost every enterprise would be using this approach today for signing on his code and avoid supply chain attacks on the implemented code. So here you would have a set of keys and certificates for code signing. So these are major examples of keys that will need to be safely moved, migrated, and used on the cloud environment once you migrating your applications and development processes to the cloud.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah. So given that we've now identified what sort of data we've got in there and what keys are currently being used to protect that data, so we figured out what we've got protected already. What kind of extra protection are we going to need to add to actually get that cloud application to be in a suitable state, ready for migration? So, Guy, I'm going to hand this back to you. I know you've worked with a number of applications in this way. Talk us through how you help customers go about this, adding the encryption that they need.
Yeah, so I think the main underlying narrative here would be that many things that you have assumed or considered to be safe when you run things on your own premises, and you have you consider these things not to be required because you say, well, my data center, I have plenty of protections, I have my firewall, I have everything to protect access into my data center, so maybe I can ignore these kinds of protections. Once you move into the cloud, you just have, you need everything to be secured. So you basically need all your data to be encrypted. You need all the different channels to be encrypted. So you need to use TLS and SSH in order to secure access to the machines in the data center and secure the intercommunication between these different components on the cloud data center. And you're no longer in the boundaries of your domain, of your data center. So all the issues around strong authentication and making sure that you apply these kinds of authentication and authorization management into your cloud payload. These are all things which are a must before you can actually move something which manages sensitive information to the cloud. So again, the narrative is moving from a situation where you had some trust in your infrastructure to a situation where you have no trust in the infrastructure, and you have to make sure that you put all the controls in place in order to gain trust back.
Right. And so we've seen that a key requirement of this is to be able to make sure that your cryptography policy, so that's what's going to enforce that encryption across the at rest and in transit, and make sure that that trust is reestablished in the cloud. You need to make sure that that's followed at scale. So across a complicated application or a set of complicated applications, you want to be sure that you're following that key management process. You're separating your keys from your execution environment, so you're always storing them somewhere else in the cloud, either in a dedicated service or some kind of hardware service or whatever it is that's going to keep those keys safe. And so you need to enforce that policy at all times. So what we find with our customers is a lot of the time the cloud transformation project is coupled to a modernization of the development process and moving towards something a little bit more like DevSecOps or sort of CI/CD, shortening the product development cycle and the redeployment cycle. And when we do that into the cloud, we have to be sure that we're going to follow that crypto policy all the time, so no changes are made to the application that's going to take it outside that crypto policy. And so we're going to need to have the right kind of tools to enforce that policy as we move across at scale. So Guy, you've got a nice summary of this. Maybe you'd like to talk us through that.
Yeah, so these are, again, this is to try to basically describe the entire scope of making sure you protect your data when moving to the cloud. So you first need to make sure that you manage the access to the data. We've discussed previously the issue of strong authentication and making sure that only authorized personnel or you only get access to the data that you should be able to, or you are allowed to see. And one very effective way to do it is by protecting the encryption keys, because if you only have access to the data when it's encrypted, it's basically useless. But if you manage the keys and protect and provide proper protection and proper authorization for using the keys, then this is a very strong way to enforce usage of data only for authorized people. Once you start doing that in large scale, you have plenty of different applications. You also need to provide proper tools to manage these ceremonies of different keys, different access control, per keys, per application, and so on. So you would need to have a strong and holistic key management solution so you can manage this ceremony. And obviously, one of the very strong elements, both for doing validation post action, but also for online auditing and maybe online detection of misuse, you would also like to have a very strong logging and auditing system for any usage of any key. So if data is being now decrypted, you know it is happening. If something which something which abnormal, and you see abnormal usage of these decryption keys, you can actually stop that, and so on. So by providing a holistic key management solution to protect and authorize access, to manage keys at scale, and to provide online complete audit log, if you utilize such a system, this is definitely a strong tool in securing the migration process we have discussed so far.
Thanks, Guy. So let's bring that all together and talk about a process that actually allows us to make that migration happen. So the way that we've seen it work well with our clients is to start small. So we want to prove out this migration process, the identification of the sensitive data, identification of how it's been protected at the moment, and the addition of that strong cloud encryption for the future. So a good way that we've seen this work is to choose an application that has real business interest to do the first migration. So there's a trap that we've seen some organizations fall into, which is to start with the inconsequential applications. But in fact, what tends to happen is this stops the cloud migration project from really gaining momentum, because we're not seeing the sort of benefits that we would like to see. But instead, we choose a application that's well used, preferably a little bit more simple than perhaps the most complicated applications we have. Then we're actually got a chance of building a project where we can get buy-in and actually get some momentum to achieve those business objectives. And so what we suggest for this application is to start with a crypto cartography. So understand the cryptography that's in the existing app and figure out what it's doing now. Do an audit of that cryptography, fix what needs to be fixing, so upgrade the crypto hygiene, as we call it, so that we know that cryptography is how it should be. Then add that missing encryption. So as Guy talked about, to re-establish trust in the cloud application, we're going to look at using encryption for all the data at rest and data in transit. And then we need to figure out the key life cycle of the keys that are actually going to do all that encryption, and figure out how to migrate them to the appropriate cloud cryptography service that's going to allow us to keep those keys safe and away from the compute as that application then goes forward in the future. So what we learn on those early applications we're going to use to create the blueprints for the scaled migration project. So we're going to understand the right solutions for the kind of keys that we want to manage for our uses of encryption, and then find a way to scale that by a set of blueprints for application types to help the project build out to scale. Okay, so that's a summary of how CryptoSense and Unbound have encountered the cloud migration problem and helped our customers recently to achieve some migrations of sensitive applications. I think we've got a few questions come through from the webinar participants, so I'm going to hand back to Sam to help us go through a few of those.
Yeah, thanks very much. That was a great presentation. So yeah, we've had a couple of questions through. The first question is, what about cloud provider lock-in? If they have my keys, how can I move to another cloud if necessary?
That sounds like a question for Guy, maybe. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So indeed, that's a problem, and in many cases, you might be tempted to do the ad hoc approach and use the built-in key management solution that cloud providers can suggest or may suggest or suggest. This is indeed in many cases the right approach. There are many cases where you would need to do it for the sake of interworking with the native services of the cloud provider. However, you need to take into consideration indeed the issue of lock-in, and we would advise, and in many cases you would find your enterprise using more than a single cloud provider and would like to enjoy the ability to move payloads from one provider to another and so on. So there are tools that exist already that can allow you to make sure you are not locked in, even if you are using the native services of the cloud provider. So for example, you can manage keys on the IaaS level and then share it across different cloud providers and avoid locked in and allow different payloads or moving payloads from one cloud provider to the other. And even if you are using the native KMSs of the cloud providers, then they provide you today tools to do what they call bring your own key or hold your own key and services of this sort, where you can manage the original keys in an additional system, and you just import or transfer it to the cloud, to the specific cloud provider in order to utilize a specific use, while you still own the original version, and you can at any point of time use it on a different provider. So utilizing a system that will allow you to manage keys across providers and use a key in a specific provider without lock-in, that's definitely something that you would like to consider as part of this migration process.
So question 2 is, I have an application using the proprietary API of a physical HSM that's not available in my cloud provider. How can I migrate the cryptography in the app?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a very tough problem, and we've actually seen this in a lot of our financial services customers that have built applications some time ago that are very specific to particular APIs. So I would say, however you're going to do that, there's various options. So if you're at a big enough scale, you might be able to persuade a cloud provider to actually host those devices for you. But if you do that, you'll never get the full advantages of the scaling and horizontal scaling and elasticity and availability from the cloud that you want. At some point, you're going to have to pull the plug on that hardware box. And the way to do that is to understand what cryptography is actually going through that proprietary interface, and then figure out a way to do those same operations using standard interfaces, at least to the extent that that's possible. So you may still need some small additions, but most of that stuff can actually be translated to standard calls. So some of the tools in the CryptoSense toolbox can help with that if you're interested in finding out some more. Sam, have we got any more questions?
Yep, there's one more question. The next question is, if I have an existing app using keys in production as an on-prem HSM, how can I reuse those keys in the cloud?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think Guy spoke a little bit to that already. So some of the services in the cloud do allow you to bring your own key, that is to actually establish a key value of your own under protection in a cloud crypto service. One of the things that we do at CryptoSense with our tools is help you identify those keys and figure out which one of those need to migrate. But maybe Guy, you'd like to add a little bit on this?
Yeah, so not in all cases you're actually able to use the exact same key, but no matter what the key purpose is, there are always methods for you to migrate the existing usage to a different system in cloud. So detection and so on, I think this is very well covered by tools such as the tool provided by CryptoSense. And then the usage itself, if it's a signing key, you can always just create a new signing key. It's not a big deal to start using with a different signing key. And if it's an encryption key, for example, then in most of the existing encryption systems, you would have an escrow service where you protect this an original encryption key, and then you can just transfer this encryption key from the escrow service to a new to the new key management system that you utilize in cloud. So I know, and we actually are facing that with customers. There's a great fear around how would I migrate my existing keys from my on-prem hardware to the cloud environment. Well, where actually in real life scenarios, when you actually come into the implementation phase, that's not such a big deal. Eventually you can either do something which is similar to key renewal and just start using a new set of keys in cloud, or there are ways for you to securely transfer the keys from the existing devices to the new ones running in cloud.
Thanks, Guy. That's very reassuring. I think we're approaching the time limit now. Sam, do you want to help us finish up?
Yeah. So I'd just like to thank everybody for attending today, and please send us any further questions that you might have. We'd be delighted to answer your questions personally if you want to send those to us via email. And we will be sharing the presentation deck with everybody who's attended. And thanks and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.